Okay, I'd just really like to welcome everyone to tonight's webinar and welcome Kate Phillips, who's joining us for this. We're talking about flock economics. So I just especially want to say thank you, Sheep Vet Society and all the companies that have supported this series of webinars. You can see all the logos there across the bottom of this first slide. And especially want to thank MSD Animal Health and Project Lamb, who are headline partners for this particular webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to go over to Kate. The way we're working today's webinar is slightly different from the others. So Kate's got a lovely amount of slides there. Please do interrupt with questions in the Q&A box or the chat box, but preferably for questions, put them in the Q&A box, and then I'll jump in and ask Kate as we're going along. So if anything's not clear or you want, we'll ask the questions as we're going along, and then we'll have time at the end, hopefully, for the rest of the questions. Okay, I think that's us. Kate, I haven't said anything about yourself. I think everybody knows you've been a member of Sheep Vet Society for a long time, haven't you? You're an honorary sheep vet. Anyway, it's brilliant that you're here with us today sharing about flock economics. Kate, over to you.
Thanks very much, Fiona. Thank you. Hello, everybody. I guess this isn't an area of sheep farming that you get very involved in, but my aim tonight is really to give you an overview of sheep economics and how we work things out in a sort of routine way, and just to show really how profitable or unprofitable sheep farming is at the moment, and run you through some of the sort of basic methods we use to look at profitability and cost benefit analysis. So initially, just to set the scene really, just to think about what sheep farmers are facing at the moment. And the first slide or two is just a bit of background really to introduce the challenges that are facing everybody. Obviously, Brexit is still uncertain. We haven't actually, I know in theory we're going to be leaving on December the 31st, but we haven't got anything absolutely in stone yet of what that deal is going to look like. We're facing a lot of criticism, the anti-meat lobby. We've got a lot of criticism as ruminant farmers in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. There's lots of biased reporting and a huge amount of uncertainty surrounding all the claims on greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. And the other major thing that farmers are facing is diminishing support payments. The basic payment is to be phased out by 2025 over a 5-year transition period. And as you'll see from some of the slides further on, that a lot of farmers depend very, very heavily on support payments. What's going to happen in the future, the higher level stewardship, that's what HLS stands for, mid-tier environmental schemes and the basic payment scheme are going to be replaced by the environmental land management scheme. And that is under debate at the moment. There are farmers piloting the scheme and the detail of that will come out in the future. But the main thrust of that will be public money for public goods, and the things that are going to be included are improved air, water and soil quality, improved biodiversity, climate change mitigation, cultural benefits, and to protect the historic environment, which a lot of sheep farmers already do, I hasten to add. Okay, so I hear this quite often, that a lot of sheep vets find it very difficult to persuade farmers to spend money and don't see that the vet can really help them improve profitability. I don't agree with that, but in many situations, and I do believe you've got a huge role to play in helping them make better profits. But some of these slides I've got going, just the next couple, hopefully demonstrate why some of them are very reluctant to spend money with you. Now this graph is taken from the Farm Business Survey, which is done with about 1,750 farms in England, and farms are broken down into farm types. And I just want you to hone in on the middle two, well, sort of the grazing livestock lowland and the grazing livestock LFA, less favoured area. And if you look at the figure on top of the column for those two types of farm, you will see the lowland grazing livestock farms on average were only making £12,500, and the LFA farmers £15,500. Now, if you look below the zero, below the line, the blue below the line is agriculture, basically saying that of those farms in the survey, they were all losing money, or that on average they were losing money from their agricultural activities, which is rather depressing, really. And if you look what's above the line we have agri-environmental payments, we have diversified income, and we have the basic payment. So you can see what a huge impact the support payments actually have on the average income on many of the farms you're dealing with sheep included in the enterprise mix. So it's a pretty depressing story when you look at that, and you can maybe think why many sheep farmers say can't afford it, can't do it, but they don't see beyond the cost and don't look at the benefit that you can bring to them. So just to put that in perspective, there are within those averages farmers who are making a good living. And if you just look at the grazing livestock again, lowland and LFA, you can see on the far left hand side of the graph, you will see the dark blue line, which accounts for something like 30% of farms with sheep, mixed livestock, are earning nothing, which is a pretty depressing figure. And you look across to the other side of the screen and look at anybody who's earning more than £75,000 a year, we have about 5% of those farms are earning over 75,000. But if you compare that to the dairy farmers, you can see it's well over 40% of them are earning over £75,000 a year. So you can see a huge disparity between the two types of system. But it does show you that there are farmers who are making sensible profits from their sheep farming, and you know it's not all doom and gloom, basically. Okay. And just another thing to put things into perspective is on the world scale. If you think about we're going into a sort of world trade in the future, we need to think how we compare to other countries across the world. And this graph is taken from a project which is done on an annual basis called Agri Benchmark. AHDB, I think it's Carol Davis in AHDB, actually represents the UK on this committee, and she puts in typical figures for UK farms. So here we have the sheep for 2017. This is the last one I could get my hands on. And a typical UK flock, the third column from the left, lambing 450 ewes. And if you look at the red dot, that is the returns that these farms are getting. But the whole column, the tall column, including the green, the blue and the turquoise, is the total cost of production. So you can see that the New Zealanders and the Australians are making money, and we, just to reinforce what was said before, we aren't making money, and we are actually in a fairly similar position to Ireland, Spain and France in that respect. So on the world stage, we do need to reduce our cost of production if we can compete successfully with Australia and New Zealand. Okay, so given all these uncertainties and the sort of some of the doom and gloom that I've already relayed to you, what can farmers do to make things better and make a better living from their livestock? A big push on becoming more efficient, getting more productivity, reducing costs, getting more from less, basically, trying to be less reliant on support payments. So it's all about, in my view, improving performance, health and welfare of their animals, and keeping control of costs. The other thing we can do, I think, because consumption of lamb has been going down year on year, is possibly engage with the public rather more successfully than we have in the past, and try to encourage more people to eat lamb, seen as a green. I mean, I'm throwing some photographs into this presentation tonight that hopefully portray our industry in a very good way, in the sense that the green and pleasant land of the UK, animals grazing freely, you know, being kept to good standards, would encourage the public to see lamb as a very green and environmentally friendly meat to be eating. Okay, right. What does cost of production mean to you? And where might you find information? I've been heavily involved with a large retailer and doing a cost of production project for them with some of their suppliers. And it's a very interesting experience to be working on that project, because not many farmers think in this way. They do not think about how much it costs them produce a lamb, or how much it costs them produce a kilogram of lamb. And I won't go as far as that really tonight, because there's too much detail involved in that. But cost of production is all of the costs involved in producing a lamb, be it for breeding females or for finished lamb. And we can actually look at it per head, or we can look at it per kilogram produced. And of course, there's not just one way to do that efficiently and to get a sensible margin. We can do it by a high input system. Oh, whoops, sorry, I don't know what's happened there. Oh, sorry.
It's looking fine from here, Kate.
Oh, is it? Right,
Yep,
sorry.
yep,
Something's happened at my end. Right, back in. Okay, sorry, something happened with my screen. Yes, there's proverbially more ways to skin a cat, as they say. High input, high output can be just as profitable as low input, low output. What we need to be avoiding is the high in and low out scenario. So I'm going to take you through some of the sort of methods that we use to look at cost of production and gross margin analysis as we go forward. So what are the costs involved in producing lamb? Firstly, we need to think about the variable costs, and that's the cost that varies with the level of output. So if you, for instance, feed is a good example. If you have 500 ewes or 400 ewes, you will have potentially a different amount of food required for those animals, depending on the size of the flock. Whereas if you have some buildings, that building probably, unless you're putting up new buildings, that will not vary. The building's there, you might use it 4 times to put the same, 1,000 sheep through, rather than using it once for 500. So that's a fixed cost. But in terms of variable costs, we talk about feed, concentrates, minerals, buckets, blocks, forage, tack, away grazing. That is basically buying in food. It's not a rent, it's actually buying food for the animals. We talk about seeds and sprays, so we might be considering putting reseeds in. We might be spraying with herbicides or pesticides to protect fodder crops. Anything to do with producing forage crops would be included there. We would need nitrogen, fertilizer, phosphate and potash, and potentially lime, to be making sure we have the right nutrient balance in the soil, that we're going to produce as much grassland, make our grassland as productive as we can, so we've got the right soil nutrients there and the right soil conditions. Veterinary services and medicines. I've emphasised the medicines because sometimes farmers might put their medicines bought from the ag supplier in a sundries box, whereas to actually get a proper estimate of veterinary costs, we need the vet services yourselves, we need the cost of medicines bought from you, and we also need the cost of medicines bought elsewhere. Bedding is a variable cost because that can vary each year, and sometimes many farmers will be buying that in. And then there's a big sort of catch-all box or other livestock expenses or sundries, which has things like haulage, tags, lambing supplies, castration rings, commissions and levies, and fallen stock disposal, anything that doesn't fit anywhere else, basically. And then we have the cost of replacement breeding sheep, which we need to take account of. It's not exactly a variable cost, but it does vary each year according to mortality and culling rates. And just to emphasise that obviously poor health and nutrition can have a huge impact on most of those variable costs. So it's very easy to demonstrate cost benefit if you're keeping animals growing faster, being more efficient, not having and growing faster, having high fertility, all of those things, that we can be ruling out disease and keeping costs as low as we can with the minimum sick animals or dead animals. So the other costs we have to consider are the fixed costs, and these are the ones that don't change with the level of output, although you might find that a little bit debatable on the item of labour. You would think you'd need more labour, and you generally do for the more animals you have, although that's not always a direct relationship. given many farmers would lamb outside and need less labour than those lambing inside intensively. So we're looking at things like labour, paid and unpaid. Most farmers' labour, their own labour, would be considered the unpaid labour and the family labour. I always say to the students at Harper, they're the unpaid labour, rarely get paid properly for their labour on the farm at home. Machinery repairs and spares are things that the farmer needs to spend cash on to pay for. Equipment and hire, contracting, that would be a cash cost. Fuel and electricity, not that we're using an awful lot of electricity for sheep unless they're housed for long periods of time. And fuel, obviously, to drive the quad bike, the Land Rover, the lorry, whatever. And then we have actual and imputed rent. By imputed rent, that would be a landowner, somebody who owns the land and doesn't pay rent for the land. So that would be a non-cash cost if you're just putting an imputed rent on the land owned. Actual is if you're paying out a cash cost for the land you're renting. And then we've got building maintenance and water, which would be a non-cash cost. Well, sometimes cash or non-cash, sorry, it puts anything by that one. And then finance and depreciation tend to be non-cash costs. I put those in because that helps to explain one of the further slides that I get to in a few minutes. And of course, just put in that sort of bullet point at the bottom, poor nutrition and health can impact on some of these. And particularly I was meaning the labour. Obviously, if we've got excess levels, high levels of disease, lameness, or whatever it was, labour can be increased simply because of that disease and the impact of working with those animals to get them better. So we talk about trying to reduce costs of production, but it's not all about cutting costs. If you've got the same cost and produce more output, your pence per kilogram in cost per animal per kilogram is going to be less. So it's not all about cutting costs, it can be about improving output. But equally, we should be looking at scrutinising the costs. So we talk about looking at the cost of feed relative to the output the animals have got, and I'll come on to an example in a minute. How much fertiliser is applied? Are we getting a response to the fertiliser used on farm? If the pH of the soil isn't ideal, then the fertiliser response will not be good. Are the vet and med costs being spent wisely on the appropriate things on the farm? Look at labour, input and land and machinery. But in terms of what you're going to be doing, I would think with most of your farmers, it would be looking at health and maybe looking at nutrition too. And of course, genetics would have an impact too if we're actually trying to select animals that are more efficient, growing faster, being higher quality carcasses that meet market specifications. So that is all involved as well.
Kate, I'm just going to stop your video because I'm afraid it's going a bit Dalek-y. It's all right, keep going, keep talking.
You sure? Right.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. Okay. So just wanted to walk through a little bit about the cost of disease. I'm sure many of you will have tried to work this out with farmers, but just to put it all into perspective in a way. Cost of disease, we've got the direct costs, the visible losses, we've got the lamb losses, we've got the ewe losses, we've maybe got loss of body condition, poor body condition, even ending up with dead animals, and we've got reduced performance in lambs. Maybe it's a worm resistance issue and we've got low growth rates. The invisible losses reduce fertility. It's not that invisible with our scanning percentages, and certainly invisible losses maybe in terms of reduced feed conversion. Indirect costs, we are looking generally at suboptimal production, not particularly at, we can't see it particularly, but actually everything is just not working as it should. And then we've got additional costs of disease in terms of how much the farmer needs to spend on medicines, vaccinations, more feed and more labour. So that sort of hopefully describes the sort of things you need to be thinking about when you're looking at how much a disease is costing an individual farmer.
Just one moment, Kate. So somebody's got a raised hand. Are you able to put a question, Shaminda, could you put a question in the question box, possibly? Sorry, you carry on, Kate. Okay.
In terms of looking for information for you to compare farmers' data to, there are a whole host of things available. I just want to put a word of warning on them, really. A lot of these sets of data are literally a number of farms It's not a target, it's actually data collected from real farms and an average or a top third, a bottom third produced. So they're not targets, they're actually what sort of realistic farmers are doing. And you need to be aware that sometimes the numbers of farms aren't particularly large, so you need to take that into account and try to find sort of reliable, up-to-date data. It does vary, and I think some of the slides we're going to show you in a minute show that depending on what source you use, you get a different answer. So just be aware of that. AHDB Farm Bench is potentially a very good system. I think it's taking time to get people onto it. Stocktake was the historic way of recording performance and costings for sheep farmers, and I'm using some of the older data here. HCC take the Farm Business Survey and use that data to produce lamb cost of production information, and I'm sure QMS in Scotland and LMS in Ireland do similar things. The AHDB KPI calculators are quite useful in terms of looking at physical performance on farms. The Farm Business Survey happens every year, so there will be, as a slight lag in that, it's obviously produced the year after the data has been gathered, but that is there for you to look at. And if all else fails, there's John Nick's pocketbook for farm management, which actually sets out, it's not actual data, it's sort of predicted data for the coming year in terms of budgeting. And then finally, there was a large project in Wales called the HCC Red Meat Benchmarking Project, which I will show you a little bit of detail from in a moment. Okay. Okay, is that okay now, Fiona?
Yeah.
Yep.
Try that.
Okay, sorry. Right, so to make a good start on looking at performance, physical and financial performance of a flock, we really need to start with the numbers. How many animals have gone to the top, how many rams are used, how many ewe lambs were part of that flock, because that obviously will impact on the scanning percentages. How many lambs are reared, what mortality we've got, ewe and ram mortality, performance in terms of lamb growth rate, how long lambs are getting to finish, and how many replacements are needed on the farm. So these sorts of things really set the scene for putting the costs in context relative to the performance of the flock. This is the AHDB KPI calculator. Sorry, I've just put it there to remind myself to mention it to you. It's far too small for you to really read on the screen very well, but it is a nice, quick, ready reckoner calculator of taking you through how many ewes, how many rams, scanning results, and then if you see on the right-hand side, there are some targets set there for lamb mortality, for growth rates, for lamb weight reared per ewe, and that sort of thing. And that's quite a nice, simple thing for you to walk through with a farmer and work it out with him, and then look at those performance characteristics on the right-hand side and see if they're anywhere close to being close to those targets. So just to walk you through a very simple approach to that, this is just back of the envelope stuff, but in terms of a 500 ewe flock that's pregnancy scanned at 70 days in lamb and it's scanned at 190%, how many lambs are we expecting? So 190, 1.9 times 500 would give us 950 lambs expected. Empty ewes, we've got 2.5% empty ewes. The farmer's provided you with that in terms of what he's the scanner has given him, and you might like to question that and debate whether that's high or low or where you'd like it to be. I always think we want that to be 2% or lower, but that's a point of conversation to have with the farmer. So this farmer's rearing 150%, so 1.5 times 500 gives us 750 lambs. So you can immediately see that from scanning to rearing, he's lost 200 lambs. So 200 divided by 950 as a percentage gives us 21% lamb losses from scanning to rearing. Now, it'd be great to think we could get everybody down to sort of 14, 15% in that, or less than that. Ideally, it'd be great to get to 10%, but very few farmers achieve that. But 21% might set alarm bells going with you when you do these calculations. You think, what's going on here? Why are the losses so high? Have we got an abortion problem? Have we got issues with trend lamb disease? It just opens up the door for that discussion with the farmer about what his, flock performance. So why were their lambs lost? What, can you identify where the peaks of loss were and what the causes were? Further on to that discussion is how long did it take the lambs to finish? Did they finish at all? And what was their average age at slaughter? And then to think about the system he's running, and is this acceptable relative to the system? So early or late lambing, indoor or outdoors. A loss rate of lambs at 21% on an outdoor flock in bad weather would be much more acceptable than an indoor lambing flock, for instance. So it's always important to look back at the system the farmer's trying to operate relative to his performance levels. Okay, so we've got the physical performance, or the outline of physical performance, and then we're going to try to look at how we would assess the output of the farm and the gross margin. A gross margin is basically the gross output, so that's the lambs sold, the wool sold, less the cost of replacements and less the cost of the variable costs, the feed, the fertilizer, the seeds and sprays and things. So you can see in terms of gross output, lamb sales finished, stores retained, so sometimes we have to put a valuation on the lambs that are remaining on the farm if there are a significant number there. Those retained for breeding, wool sales. Replacement costs, I'm going to take you through a short calculation on that in a moment, but that is the sale of the culls less the cost of replacements. And then variable costs, as we've said before, those mixture of items that we need to buy in to make the system work. So in terms of how we do a gross margin, we usually look at a 12-month period, a gross margin for the production year, and I would normally start pre-tupping. So for a March lambing flock, I'd go from the 1st of September to the 31st of August 2020. Now, there is another tool on the AHDB website called Stocktake Lite, and I did try to use it the other day, and it does seem to be working. So that program would take you through the performance, physical performance data that you need, and it would also take you to a gross margin level if you wanted to do that and do all the calculations for you. There's the sort of front page for Stocktake Lite. Right, just as an example, I have taken the AHDB Stocktake 2016 data, which is the last sort of full set of data that's on the AHDB website at the moment. And I just thought, and they divided it into bottom third, average and top third. So I just thought it would be worth showing you this set of data. As I say, each year it does change. So bear in mind, this is 4 years ago and not necessarily appropriate at the moment, but it's just an example. So in terms of lamb sales, you can see these farms are very, very similar. Top third, £91.40 on lamb sales, compared to the bottom third at £89.44. So not very much difference in output. Wool, the top third were getting slightly more for their wool. Not quite sure why that would be. Maybe the breed of sheep, slightly more pence per kilo than some of the others at the bottom end of the scale. But it could be that their maintaining fleece is much better, their fly strike control is better, they haven't had sheep scab, they're just getting a higher value for their wool than a bottom third producers. So the gross output for the top third is literally only about £3, £3 different to the bottom third. So, and that's largely just a tiny bit on lamb sales and a little bit on wool. So you might be surprised by that it's not output that's the issue here. If you look at the replacement charges, this is the flock replacement charge in terms of what's bought and sold in terms of new and culled sheep. They're not that dissimilar either, and you can see the net output once you've taken off the flock replacement charge is quite similar. So we're looking at only about £1.50 difference between the top third and the bottom third farmers in that respect.
And arguably, Kate, that's not necessarily significant, is it? Sorry, I've got to rush you on a bit, actually, Kate.
Okay.
I know how many slides you've got. I'm rushing you on.
No, I'll crack on. Right. Okay. Right. This one is quite an in-depth slide, but I'm going to run through it. Okay. This is a good conversation to have with your farmers because it tells you an awful lot of information. So if we have a flock of 500 ewes, That flock has 12 rams, so the ewe to ram ratio is 42. 25 ewes die, which is effectively 5% of the flock dying, which isn't abnormal. It's a fairly common figure. If you know, we can see figures down at 2%, but quite commonly it's 5%. The number of ewes culled is 75, so that's 15% of the flock. The value of the cull ewes is £80. The value of a cull ram is £65, and we actually lose one ram and we cull 2. So our management of the rams isn't too bad. So the total income from culls is over £6,000. That's adding the value of the ewes and the rams sold. We need to buy in 100 ewes to replace the dead and the culled. So that's a 20% replacement rate, basically 100 out of 500. Cost of each ewe is £120. The cost of each ram is £650. So the purchase cost of ewes and rams is almost £14,000. So what we do to work out the replacement cost is simply divide that £14,000 by the 500, and we get to a cost per ewe replacement cost of £15.64. This is the sort of blunt way of doing it. If we were doing it accurately, we do a full valuation at the beginning and the end of the year and take account of small changes in flock size. But for simplicity, we've kept it simple with cost of culls versus cost of replacements. So if we now look at another flock, the flock on the right-hand column here, this is a flock with more problems than the first flock. So we've got the same size of flock, the same number of rams, but we've got more ewes dying. So we've got 35 rather than 25. We're having to cull more ewes. So we are culling 80. So we're ending up with a 16% of the ewes as culled. Those culled ewes are worth less because they've been ill in some way. Maybe it was lameness. The rams that we lose die rather than being sold. The total income from culls now is over £2,000 less than it was on the first farm. So we need to buy in more replacements to replace those ewes. So our replacement rate is 3% higher. The ultimate cost of the ewes and the rams, buying in 3 rams and those 115 ewes, is now close on £16,000, which actually brings us up to a replacement cost of £23.50. So there's an awful lot to be investigated with a farmer if you can walk him through that calculation. How many ewes did he lose? How many rams? What cost? And you can quickly come to a figure for replacement costs on, you know, this is a sort of back of the envelope sort of calculation, but hopefully that demonstrates to you how.
I've just got a question there.
Yeah.
What about if someone's rearing his own ewe replacements and there's no, how would you work out replacement cost for someone rearing their own ewes?
You put a valuation on them, Fiona. So if you are rearing your own ewe lambs and lambing ewe lambs, you would bring those in at whatever the value you wanted to put on them. Let's say they're coming in at £90 each to replace the ewes. So it's the same sort of thing, but you just put a valuation on those animals and that is put into the calculation.
So you'd sell them out of the lamb flock the previous year and you buy them into the ewe flock, as it were?
Effectively, yes. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Brilliant.
So you produce them, but you haven't sold them, you've kept them. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Right, so just moving on to variable costs now, and I just wanted to run you through this fairly quickly. You can find these on the HDB website, but just to show the difference really. So if you look at the top line, purchase feed including minerals, the bottom third farmers are spending over £15 per ewe on feed. That could include lamb feed as well as ewe feed. The top third are only spending just over £3. So if you wanted to just work that out in terms of relative amount of concentrates, and I've done a quick calculation just to help you with that. So if concentrates, compound feed was £250 a tonne, and you worked out, you divided the £15.83 by 25p a kilo, that's what £250 is, that would give you a figure of 63 kilograms of feed purchased by that farmer, as opposed to the top third farmer who was only probably buying about 15 kilos of feed in. And bearing in mind that the lamb output was very similar for those two in terms of sales, but one is using 63 kilos of concentrates and the other only 15, it shows us some major discrepancy in how that feed is utilised on the farms. Similar things can be pulled out in terms of veterinary medicines. Don't know what's happening with the bottom third. They're spending a lot on veterinary medicines, maybe more emergency treatments, and maybe the top third is spending more on preventative medicines, hence having to spend less, possibly. Bedding is another indicator. It looks like the top third farmers spending 38 pence on bedding are housing their ewes for a very short period of time, whereas the bottom third seem to be keeping them in potentially for a much longer period, or are paying much more for their bedding. Sundries, all those bits and pieces, are very, very similar across all farms, but you'll see in terms of variable costs, huge difference between the top third and the bottom third farmers. So just giving you that huge scale difference from those who are pretty efficient with the utilisation of their variable costs to those who probably aren't. And just to take you finally just to the gross margin analysis, so we have the net output that we had in a previous slide, and we take off the variable costs, and that will give us the gross margin. And in this set of data, the bottom third gross margin is only £37 a ewe, and the top third is £64. And there is a huge discrepancy, as you can see, in the variable costs. If we move on to fixed costs, that's all of the other costs we mentioned earlier. You can see with the bottom third, they are spending £43, over £43 more on their fixed costs than the top third farmers too. So the net margin is different by £70 a ewe, which is hard to believe really. The bottom third in this set of data were effectively losing £52. Not that this all excludes the support payments by the way everybody, whereas the top third were making £17 a ewe. So, and you can see the level of output. Oddly enough, in this set of data, the bottom third were rearing 141% and the top third 136. So it's not all about output. In this set of data, it was more about cost control and utilising those variable costs wisely and not spending too much on fixed costs as well. So hopefully that gives you a sort of rounded view on gross margin analysis, taking you somewhere to a figure. But farmers like to, or we like to, introduce lots of key performance indicators. And in terms of measurement and sort of comparing farms, we can maybe look at gross margin per ewe, which we've just looked at, but more meaningful often is to a farmer is per hectare, because he may be able to be doing something else with those hectares. Compare it to his beef enterprise, for instance. But also we need to be looking net margin per ewe and net margin per hectare, taking all those costs into account. And the other ones that are quite useful, kilograms of lamb produced per ewe mated or kilograms of lamb produced per hectare, all useful benchmarks to be comparing farms with like farms. So thinking about the differences, what makes the difference between a top third farmer and a bottom third farmer? From that set of data, and I say, but data varies, it looked like it was control of costs. But in general, it tends to be doing lots of little things better. Fiona, are you coming in there?
Oh, well, have you got my cycling photo? Because a few people have heard me and using the analogy of the British cycling team. And they went from, I think it was no medals at all in the whole of the last century to however many that they've had recently. But it was as tiny little things like painting the inside of the truck white to make sure there was no dust on the bikes, and using different lycra, and the tiniest little things all adding together, aggregation of marginal gains. And as you put this slide, I was thinking that's a cycling analogy, and people have heard us talk about that before. So yeah,
absolutely. And what I thought we'd do now, just sort of, there was an analysis done by Andersons and HDB. They took all the data from the Farm Business Survey results and compared top third and bottom third farmers, and came out with this list of what top farmers do as opposed to bottom farmers. So they minimise the overhead costs, and that set of data just demonstrated that. They set goals and budgets, so they actually work out, and that's one thing with the COP project I was involved in. The farmers knew what they were going to be paid for their lamb, so they could budget properly. So they actually had a contract and a set price per month that they could work to. So they were very sort of tuned into their cost of production and what their costs were. Compare yourself with others and gather information. So that's the benchmarking thing. That's maybe something you can help your farmers do. Understand the market. So that's a key one in terms of making sure the product produced by the farm is going to meet current market specifications, and marketing at the right time. A lot of the Muslim festivals really are key times to be marketing lamb to get the best out of in terms of price return. So understanding what the market wants is a key one. Focus on detail. I think that's what some of these top performing farmers are doing. They really are taking care about lamb mortality. They're really looking at feed costs. They're making sure their veterinary medicines are spent wisely and preventing disease problems. And I think having an open mind, lots of them have an open mind. They're willing to change, try something new, take a few risks and innovate. And another one that was pulled out from that data was continually improve people management. So good lambing routines, the whole team know what they're doing. Just treating people fairly and, you know, engaging them and giving them responsibility and specialising. Something that I've noticed over many years now is that I go to farms who love their sheep and keep cattle, and other farms that love their cattle and keep sheep. And I think there's more of the second variety of farms, unfortunately, that sometimes sheep are not seen as the specialist enterprise, so don't perform as well. And I think where they are focused on and are the main enterprise, then that's when I think they really do can, you know, pay well, when people really specialise.
Kate, I work with a farmer, Kate, who puts up that list. She does a PowerPoint for her shepherds at the start of lambing, a sort of pep talk, and they go through all one of those and analyse themselves on how they're doing, and that's a sort of farm manager who's really driving to be top performing farm.
That's really brilliant, isn't it? And he's engaging his staff and making them take responsibility.
She is engaging her staff.
Sorry, she, even better. I shouldn't say that. Anyway, but all of these things, I think they're things we need to look at when we're talking to farmers and try to encourage them down this line, really. And that same report had these great little quotes in it, actually, which I really liked. Higher output accounts for just 10 to 30% of higher profits in top quartile farm businesses, but lower costs contribute 65 to 90%. And that example of the stock take data really sort of relates to that. The second one, which I love, we shouldn't expect to achieve different results by doing the same thing, and that's trying to get farmers out of their habits, really, and moving on to do things better. And as the third one says, habits are repeated without being questioned, and so gradually bad practice, good practice, or outstanding practices become habitual. So I'm sure they all resonate with you all in terms of the different customers you have. But my favourite one is that don't expect to achieve different results by doing the same thing. Okay, just quickly, how are we doing for time, Fiona? Am I nearly out of time? Yes.
No, you're doing fine. It's 8:15. You're okay.
Okay. So just to present another way of looking at the data, this is what HCC, Hibicum Cymru, actually do with their data taken from the Farm Business Survey in Wales, and they present it in a pence per kilogram format. So we're looking at all farms. They have a bottom third and a top third. So we can see we've got, this is in pence per kilogram of lamb produced on the farm, okay, within the production year. So we can see that, I can't see, Fiona, just tell me what's behind your photograph in the right corner in terms of the top third.
Sorry, I'll turn my photograph off. On the top third, what total, are you talking total costs?
What if I take that down? Right. Yeah, no, it's okay. Feed and forage, 46 versus 75 for the bottom third. And total cost, yeah, total variable cost, you can see we've got 74 pence a kilo for the top third, as opposed to 109 pence a kilo for the bottom third. It's basically reiterating what was happening with the other set of data. Flock replacements, lower again for the top third than the bottom third. And if you looked at total costs in terms of this set of data, £1.60 per kilo costs for the top third versus £2.51 for the bottom third. So a huge difference in cost of production from this range of farms. And if we actually looked at that further down, we looked at lambs reared per ewe. In this set of data, top third were producing quite a lot more lambs. So that would be one reason why their cost of production was lower. They were producing a lot more kilos of lamb per ewe, so 58 kilos versus 44. And if you look at the enterprise returns, those farmers were also getting a higher price for their lamb. So they were getting £1.99 per kilo for their lamb, as opposed to the bottom third farmers just getting £1.84. So you can see in terms of the total costs covered by enterprise returns, the top third are 124%, so they're actually in profit, whereas the bottom third are only getting 76% of their total costs covered by the returns from the marketplace. So a very different way of looking at the data, but still a valuable way, because that really does help farmers focus on the market price relative to what it's actually costing them to produce the animals.
I just turned your screen off again. Sorry, Kate, you're going more Dalek-y again.
Oh, sorry, it's probably my internet. Okay, keep going.
Yep.
One set of data that's well worth you having a look at, I would say, is the red meat benchmarking project, which was done with HCC in Wales in it was done with the 2016-17, 2017-18 sets of data, but it was produced in 2019 was a report. There were about 1,500 usable sets of data from beef and sheep farms across Wales. There were 647 sheep-only farms and 714 sheep and cattle farms. And effectively, that represented something like 20% of the Welsh sheep flock, with an average flock size of 677. They had to have more than 235 ewes to take part in the project, though. So it does discount some of the smaller flocks. Interestingly, from that set of data, the average support payments per farm were over £34,000. And the other thing to emphasise was farmers were actually paid £1,000 to submit their data, but it was still really difficult to persuade them to take part. So that probably indicates to you how difficult it is to get farmers to share this sort of information with you. They probably wouldn't want to tell you a lot of their costs. They might share their physical performance with you, but if they wouldn't do this for £1,000, it makes you wonder what they would take, what it would take to, make them share their financial data. If you want to look at the whole report, go onto the HCC website, Meat Promotion Wales, and the full report is there. But I did pick out just a set of data for you, just to sort of show you another range of data that might be useful. So too much on this slide, and I think it's probably best that you just go and find the report yourselves. But the top line, if we just look at some of these highlighted things, lamb sales on the top third, £100 versus 79. So if you look at the box on the right, the average farmers reared 128% of lambs and produced 47.6 kilos of live lamb per ewe. The top third reared quite a few more, 139%, and produced more kilos of lamb. But they also achieved higher prices and had a higher stocking rate. So per hectare, they were producing quite a lot more lamb. So we've just highlighted some of the key data in here. The total variable costs were very similar in this set of data. These are upland sheep farms in Wales, about 320 of them. But in terms of the net margin after rent and finance, the top third farmers had a net margin of £42.31 per ewe, and the average had £6.45, and that was before the unpaid labour was taken off. and you can see the unpaid labour is fairly similar. The average is £22 a farmer and farms a ewe, sorry, and the top third at £20 a ewe. So just showing wide differences between those top third and average farmers. So getting access to the data, that's going to be your biggest limitation. I think most farmers will give you limited physical performance data. Hopefully you can go through that very simple use ram numbers, scanning and lambs reared quite simply. Some will give you all of that performance data. Those more really those want to achieve better, I think, are willing to share, but a lot of people would not have this to hand very easily. But many will be reluctant to share their financial figures, particularly the fixed costs. They don't want to share them with many people at all. Even, you know, the accountant gets to see them, but that's the only person who does.
Kate, there's a question here from Bridget about this. If the supermarkets know cost of production,
yeah,
surely they will only ever pay the farmer just enough to keep them farming. And so she asked, what do we think is going to happen when BPS finishes? All the farmers take their lump sum. What happens to the next generation? You know, it's this reluctance to share financial figures, not just with the vets, but obviously with the retailers.
Yeah, well, that certainly with that retailer project I was involved in, some farmers just weren't willing to share their financial information, weren't willing to show us their accounts at the end of the year because we needed to get to the depreciation and finance figures from their accounts. Yeah, it is an issue, and many farmers are very reluctant to share their data, and it's a commonly held view that if you give the data to the retailers, they will screw farmers down as much as possible and just about keep them farming. But that wasn't the attitude that I came across with the retailers. They wanted to secure home produced lamb, and they wanted to make sure those farmers were having a sensible return from their investment in their system. So going forward, I don't think support payments will not disappear. They will be there, but in a different format. So they will be there in terms of environment and you know, all sorts of greenhouse gas mitigation activities and that sort of thing. So there will be support, but I do think far more farmers need to be looking critically at their costs to actually just lift their performance, because I do believe they really do need to get more from the marketplace. Be it selling, exporting as we have in the past and hoping to maintain that market, or increasing, hopefully, the home consumption of lamb in the future. Does that answer that? Okay. So yes, I think there is a bit of a difficulty with some of your farmers. I'm sure they'd share everything, but not many will share all the detail that you might want to get to. But some of the things we've gone through, I hope, show you some ways of getting in to get to the replacement costs, get to the lamb losses. Those sorts of things really do help you to sort of dig into a little more detail if they're only giving you superficial things. They might talk to you about how many cull ewes they sold, why did they cull them, and that sort of thing. So those sorts of things maybe wheedle those out of them. But in terms of looking at cost benefit, and this has been done in many projects, Richard Bennett at Reading has done quite large scale cost benefit analysis, and there are cost benefit analysis tools. But just one very simple thing is to do a partial budget. So if we have a cost and we need a new vaccine, we're talking about vaccinating the toxo, we know what the cost of the vaccine is. We know what has happened in the past in terms of lamb losses and wasted variable costs on unproductive ewes. We know you know what we can save in terms of more lambs reared. So looking at realistic figures here, we can't say vaccinating with toxo is going to stop all abortions and rear more lambs. We've got to look realistically at how many lambs the farmer is likely to rear from vaccinating with toxo. But then we need to look at the costs in terms of new vaccine plus the revenue foregone, plus the cost saved in terms of lambs being more about lambs reared, and then we can actually take the benefits, costs saved plus the revenue, from the costs of the new vaccine and the losses, and see what the cost benefit of actually giving that vaccine has been. So we can do that for a variety of different diseases. There is an EBLEX report that was put together when I was in ADAS, looking at the economics of disease costs in cattle and sheep, which you might like to look at, which actually does go through this sort of partial budgeting for a variety of different diseases. So hopefully that has given you some sort of ideas to go forward and look at costings on farm, and yeah, giving you a bit of scope in terms of where to find information, and brave looking at costs in a bit more detail with some of your clients. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you ever so much, Kate, for going through that. That was really good. Now, we've been really quiet on the questions this week, so please do put in any questions if you can think of them. Someone's asking if we can have the reference for the partial budgeting information. I think that's the work that you and Neris did.
Yes.
Kate,
yes,
would you look that out for us? That'd be brilliant.
I will. Yeah, I will. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Whilst
Yep.
people are thinking of questions, can I just once again say, well, obviously say thank you to Kate, but thank you to MSD and Project LAM for supporting this webinar, and to ask people listening, watching, to if you've appreciated it and you'd like to go to our Just Giving page. We've so far raised, I think it's just over £800 for Send a Cow and Vet Benevolent Fund. So that's brilliant. Thanks all for that. And please, if you haven't yet given and you're able to, that'd be really great. And I thank all the rest of our partners. Let me just have a quick look at the questions. We've got some compliments here. Fantastic presentation. Thank you, Kate. That was great. In the first few slides where you've got overall profit and loss, does the agriculture include the labour? So are farmers basically earning nothing, or are they making no profit?
Basically making no profit from their agricultural activities.
Okay. Yeah.
Which would include labour, yeah.
Yeah, I always think those are interesting, those slides, how that is the average, isn't it? It's great to see the contrast as well, that it's, you know, there are farmers who, if you look at the average, it is a really bad picture, isn't it?
Very depressing. But we know, don't we, and almost most of you would know, as soon as you drive up a farm drive, you have an impression of whether that farmer is actually making a return on his livestock or not. Sometimes first impressions can be wrong, of course. Some people keep shabby farms but still make money, but generally it goes hand in hand if you've got good looking stock, but they may be spending too much on other things. But yeah, it's nice to see that some sheep farmers really are making, mixed cattle and sheep farmers are making money, and doing a very efficient job, which is good to see. And we just need to get more farmers into that category by improving their efficiency in terms of output as well as cost saving.
Well, I think it's really interesting from our 2 or 3 different data sets there. There was one, those stock take from 2016 is very definitely the top third it was a costs, they weren't controlling, the bottom third were not controlling their costs, were they? And the last lot of data from HCC in the last year or so, it was actually lamb sales, and it just shows we need to be working at both ends, both sides, don't we? Reducing unnecessary costs and driving better productivity. From that point of view, I thought brilliant 2 different data sets there.
Yeah. And I must say, I have clients of my own who, I've got the very high input, very high output, the creep feeder who's got very high scanning percentages, 200% scanning, selling 170% lambs. Lambs are in and out very quickly, very high quality lambs, very high value lambs. They cost a lot to get there. And then I have another client who's got a lot of views on an easy care system, outdoor lambing, only rearing about 130%. But I think the cost of production on the large flock lambing outside is lower than the other one, although they're both still making sensible profits from sheep farming. So
yeah, it's great to have all possibilities. Yeah. I've got a couple more, as many comments as questions. So Paul is on from Canada again. many thanks for this. We need more of this done for farmers on flock health interventions. Sadly, most people considering vets a cost, and yes, certainly, the more we can talk about benefits.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I just think, I see it too often that people aren't willing to spend. And if you could just get in there and demonstrate that this vaccine is going to save, this activity, this approach is going to save money, then yeah, it will pay dividends. But it is persuading them when you see how much money some of them are actually earning. So but trying to get them out of that, move them forward.
Mm-hmm. And someone saying, do we think it was always like this, or did sheep farmers used to make a lot more? Certainly, I know locally people used to use their wool money, their wool check, to pay their whole rent. Well, certainly this year, the wool check will not even pay for the clipping, will it?
No, absolutely. Well, I'm brought up on a farm, and my father and mother, said when they were first farming and they were first generation farmers, they made money on fleeces. £3.50 a fleece they used to get, and this is like 65 years ago. So look where we are now, and we're probably going to be lucky to get £2. And what's £2 worth compared to 65 years ago? Yeah. £3.50, absolutely. Huge difference, Fiona.
Yeah, and a sheep farmer friend who might even be listening contacted me today to say he's not even looking at lamb, but not looking at wool, but his lamb prices almost identical this year to what they were in 2011. Well, that's only 10 years ago, but still, other prices have dramatically increased in that time. Yeah.
But we did go through a horrible phase in the 90s, I remember, early 90s, when the lamb price stuck at £40. £40 seemed to go on for years. And so, it was, but, subsidy support was still high then, of course. But subsidies have stifled physical performance on many farms, because a lot of farmers took their eye off the ball and have a cushion to sit on. But support payments are vital to keep farmers farming in some particular areas of the country, without a doubt, and they will still have that support going forward. But I think in terms of physical performance, the support payments do sort of aren't a good thing in terms of focusing on technical performance and profitability of the enterprise as it stands without the support.
Yeah, well, and things are going to certainly change, aren't they? So
yeah.
Let's see what happens.
Yes, exactly.
I've got a couple more comments here. So Heidi's saying, perhaps if Sheep Vet Society members who keep sheep did all these financial calculations, we could communicate better with clients.
Yeah, good idea. Yeah, we maybe should start a sort of little benchmarking group amongst the sheep vets, and
there's plenty of sheep vets who do keep sheep, so
there are, absolutely, plenty.
Bennett has a good point that out of lamb rearing percentage, in fact, this is a very good point, in that I always like to ask farmers for the raw figures, because people do calculate things in slightly creative ways, don't they? So he's pointing out that a farmer will usually calculate lambs reared percentage as total numbers of ewes lambed, not necessarily the total number put to the tup.
Absolutely, and mostly, you'd ask a farmer, how many lambs did you rear? They'll just tell you the scanning percentage. They don't even count at the end of the day how many they actually reared, got to sale, got to retain for breeding or anything. So you really have to dig in to get that information, Fiona. Completely agree with that.
Yes, I call me suspicious, but I like to have the raw data and then calculate it, and yes.
Definitely.
Phillips' comment here that, and this relates a bit to whether it's low input, low output, or high input, high output, whether we can drive the maximum for that system, the importance, and we discussed this both last webinar and the previous one we were talking to farmers, is actually the whole system, not just, there is not one size fits all, and that's part of the beauty of our industry, isn't it? That we do have different sheep farmers, different ways up the hill, different breeds, but knowing the whole system and what our aims are is totally key.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a good example of that, Fiona, isn't it, is with an outdoor lambing flock. We would not want to scan at 200%. We really wouldn't, because we'd have too many triplets and too many issues at lambing time, particularly in bad weather if we've got lots of triplets. So we would be happy with a scanning on a outdoor lambing flock of 175 to 180 and no higher on a lowland flock. Whereas in a more typical mule flock lambing indoors, we can have a high scanning percentage, be happy with that, but we'd expect to have a higher rearing percentage too. So yes, the targets for different systems are different. Yeah, we shouldn't expect everybody to be rearing 160% lambs, because that varies according to the system the farmer's chosen to manage.
Kate, Matt has an interesting question here. Do you know of a useful resource for the cost benefit of pasture improvement? And he's thinking mainly of hill farms on permanent pasture. Would you know of any good resource?
No, but I might be able to find something. Nothing just springs to mind, Fiona, but I probably could find something. So yeah, I mean, that is one of the big ones, huge one in terms of saving on variable costs, is improving grassland, be it soil nutrients or reseeding. But yeah, huge cost benefit of that. I will think about it and send it to you, Fiona, then you can share it with everybody.
And I think I might also, Liz Geneva's my grass guru, who she was speaking in the last webinar. We might be able to find something.
Yes, Liz might have something that she's got readily available. Absolutely.
Yeah, on grass.
That is a huge one, and
those figures of the cost per megajoule of energy. It's something like 6 pence for a megajoule of energy in grass, and then
6 for grass, 28 for compound.
28 for compound, exactly. So yeah. I think conserved grass is double fresh grass, isn't it? It's about 12p for silage.
12p, that's right. And then it keeps going up with it. But oddly enough, sometimes whole cereals can be cheaper than silage. I think if some of you've been to my nutrition training courses, depends on what the year. This year, a lot of barley is going to be grown, so it's not going to be that expensive, I hope. But in a rare year, barley can be cheaper than silage, would you believe, in terms of megajoules, cost per megajoule of energy. But yeah, grass 6 pence, silage about 12 pence, moving up to compounds anywhere from 25 to 30 pence a kilo dry matter.
Yeah, certainly doing diets for people, it's great putting a forage diet in there and then working out what they're now spending per year. It's very satisfying.
Yeah, it is, and I think, and also one good thing to think about in terms of cost is for every megajoule of improved silage quality or forage quality, you save about 10 kilos of concentrates.
Yes.
So that just shows the benefits of making good quality forage.
Yes.
For winter feeding. It's a rough sort of benchmark, but that's something I use quite regularly. One megajoule gives you need to buy 10 kilos less per ewe, which is a good thing. Yeah.
Sorry, just say that. Can you just give those figures again?
Roughly. If you're making silage, if a farmer's making silage, and say it's 10 megajoules per kilogram dry matter on analysis, so hopefully you might get a chance to look at these analyses. 10 megajoules is a pretty mediocre silage, but 11 megajoules per kilogram is very good, and that would be the difference of about 10 kilograms of feed for a twin bearing ewe.
Yeah.
Okay, 10 kilos, so that is like at least £2.50 a ewe saved, depending on the cost of the compound being purchased. So if you can make better silage, cut it younger, leafier, higher protein, you will need to buy in a lot less concentrates.
Yeah, and that's another message for getting forage analysis done and properly doing a diet based on your forage. Yeah, brilliant message.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to end with this question from Niall, and it's a bit of a blue sky for you, Kate. So
right.
What do you think the UK sheep flock will look like in 10 years' time? And where will it be?
It's a tricky one, but I'm sure we'll still be here. I think we'll be more efficient. I think there'll be really good farmers leading the way. I think some of the bottom end farmers will probably have given up because they can't survive without the level of support they've been having. And hopefully it'll be in a healthier place as long as we are able to export lamb to other countries without too many problems, really. But yeah, I think we'll be here. There's a lot of enthusiasm for improving efficiency. You know, I work with some farmers who really give me, you know, great hope for the future. So I do think we'll be there. It does sound like I was giving you doom and gloom in a lot of those slides, but there are farmers at the top and they lead the way and pull the others with them, hopefully. And, you know, we all just need to be pulling together to push them along too. So yeah, I think we'll still be here. I think there may be a few less ewes, but I'm not sure it'll be hugely lower. Okay.
Thank you ever so much, Kate. That was really good. We've had lots of comments from people. They enjoyed that very much.
It's a bit of a dry subject, really, but hopefully it's given everybody a bit more of an insight into cost and performance. So anyway, pleasure, everybody.
Yes. Yeah, okay. We really appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you once again to all of our sponsors and MSD. And thank you, everyone, for listening and for contributing to the questions in the chat. I haven't totally had time to go through all the questions, so apologies for that. But I think it's 20 to 9. We've done our bit. So I'm going to end the webinar now. Thank you very much. Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye.